a circle in a spiral, like a wheel within a wheel, never ending or beginning, like the circles that you find in the windmills of your mind.
Visit StogieGeeks.com/Debonaire for a list of retailers who carry Debonaire cigars. Buy some today and get a little more Debonaire. Welcome back, everyone, to the Stogie Geek Show. This is our Debonaire Ideal segment for this evening. Les Man is here in studio. Will's on the lines via Skype. And Will, we're going to talk about Figurados. Is that correct?
Yeah, and this is a listener / viewer inspired segment, and I got to give credit to Abraham Pineda, who is a loyal listener to the show. He's always pinging me with feedback and questions, and he gave me a question this week that when I heard it, when he asked it, I'm like, it made me really think, and I said this would be a really great Debonaire idea. So I pushed it up to this week because I really wanted to talk about it. The question he posed to me was, he was going through a cigar sampler of different sizes. And when it came to looking at a difference between a Toro and a Torpedo, what are some of the differences you get when you're smoking through those with that Torpedo? And I kind of said that's a great question, and I kind of expanded it out more to Figurados here because I think we can talk through other types of things besides the basic Torpedo or Bellicoso.
Well, actually, I think there's a huge difference between a Torpedo and a Figurado in terms of smoking experience, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'm talking about anything that's not a Parejo, I guess, is what I'm kind of getting at with this.
Yeah, and I would almost separate out Torpedo and Figurado in this discussion.
True.
Because
yeah, I think
Torpedo
you're right.
is basically a Parejo until you get to the end, and then it comes to a point. And there's a couple of nuances there that I like to point out to people. In fact, Apollo was smoking a Torpedo earlier. In fact, there's a line of Torpedo cigars that we got vintage, Big Pete, and I did some trading for, and I'll tell you about that in our next segment. And I was telling Apollo, you only want to cut off like a tiny little bit of that Torpedo.
Yep.
Speaking of cutters, we have less here, right? You want to cut off just that tiny little bit and see how it draws. If you needed the draw to open up a little bit, you need a little more smoke, a little more air coming through, cut off a little more. The mistake that a lot of people make, and I do this sometimes by accident, is I'll take a Torpedo and I'll cut too much off. Mm-hmm. And what happens is you get too much airflow through that Torpedo, and it tends to burn hot, and it can ruin your smoking experience. And I've done that with some cigars in the past. So you have to be very mindful that when you're cutting a Torpedo, that you can always take, it's like a haircut, right? You can always take more off. You can't put it back. So I think that's a distinction with the Torpedo. And the flavors I find in a Torpedo tend to just constantly concentrate, right? And you almost have to smoke it slow because if it gets hot, it's going to get even more concentrated, and it can ruin your smoking experience. So you want to almost smoke a Torpedo more like a Lancero. I tend to slow down more when I'm smoking a Torpedo because you get that tar buildup, and the problem is amplified in that Torpedo format. A Figurado for me is a little more, it's amped up on the experience side, right? Because it's going to come to a taper on the head and the foot. When you light up that Figurado, you're going to have to work pretty hard. You're going to have to puff on that cigar to get it over that bulb to where it starts burning. And to me, that's just kind of a part of the experience, right? Like, you're kind of going to work at it a little bit, and then the flavors open up, and you're kind of rewarded with that work by having more smoke and more flavor as it reaches the full part of that bulb. Also, I think construction-wise, Figurados is very difficult to get that draw to be good when there's a very small surface area of tobacco being burned when you first light it, and have that grow as you get over the bulb. Also, that flavor will change. You know, you're burning a different ratio of wrapper to filler as you smoke through a Figurado, which is kind of different from a Torpedo. You're pretty much wrapper to filler ratio is the same. So those are some differences that I noticed kind of off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, especially with a Salomon in particular. You're going to get And I find construction is really, really key with a Salomon. You know, with Perfectos, there was a stage I went through where I was cutting, like if there was a closed foot or a very thin taper foot, I was cutting the foot a bit.
Right.
And I kind of just didn't find that experience was doing anything. So it was kind of, I went back to just lighting it as the cigar was meant to be and just kind of being a little more patient,
Right.
working at. You got to be careful not to, we talked about lighting earlier. You do not want to scorch
Right.
that tip
Yeah, you
early
don't want to
on.
take the
You will kill the whole experience.
you don't want
doing
to take that like closed foot of a cigar when it comes to a point and take one of your fine Calibri lighters and just scorch the crap out of the wrapper leaf because
No.
that ruins the experience. It's kind of like when you get a steak and you're just scorching it on the
isn't
grill.
that kind of natural what a lot of people do? So they need to know
It
not
is
to, right?
exactly.
Right.
This is
Yeah.
the education piece that we have here on the show.
Yeah.
In the other kind of shortcut, you make cutters as well, right? Is to take I got this really nice cutter. I can just cut the end of that cigar, cut the foot of that cigar to get more surface area to burn. Well, you've kind of lost part of that cigar experience by doing that. So
Yeah, that's what I said. It was kind of like I was defeating the whole purpose of what I was smoking. It's like the same thing if you take a Bellicoso and cut the whole tip off, and I've been guilty of that as well.
mm-hmm.
You're missing, that part of that experience. And I'm going to talk about a very large ring gauge cigar in the Stogies of the week,
Yeah, you smoked
and
like an 80 something ring,
an 8x80 Parejo.
and was that from Asylum?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I'll
That's
talk.
from
I'll talk
Tom
about it.
Zucker.
It's not the first 80 I've smoked, but it's one of the largest cigars I've ever smoked. But for example, Casa Fernandez makes a cigar called the Lunatic, which is an 8x80, but they put a Bellicoso on that. So the idea
Wow.
with that Bellicoso, and I've smoked that one. It's actually a very good cigar, but the Bellicoso, it helps ease the ring gauge a bit, because you're not putting an 80 in your mouth, and it's the
Right.
same with some. If you get some of the larger ring gauges with the torpedo head, it's going to help a bit with just the experience of having that cigar.
Yeah,
in your,
anytime you take, unless I don't even smoke a larger ring gauge cigar before, right? You can take that 60 ring up to an 80 ring gauge, and when you smoke it, like it feels awkward to
Right.
smoke it because the cigar is just such a large diameter. But by tapering it a little bit, it can kind of ease that effect. And that's a great point, Will.
Yeah. The other thing I'll say about tapered heads is if you're a wet smoker, if you smoke your cigars wet, if you get them
one
very
of those
wet,
drooling all over your cigar kind of thing.
pulling one of those, yeah.
Yeah, you need to work on that. If you are one of those people, you need to work on that.
You
Don't
need
do
to
that.
work-
That's bad
Yeah.
etiquette, right?
It's not just bad etiquette. Actually, what Manuel Anoa told me from La Aurora. He's the master brother for La Aurora. And he said the saliva, he said the primary reason why when you smoke a cigar, like let's say I put this cigar down and I left for half an hour to an hour, he said that the saliva that you put on the end of that cigar is going to get into the tobacco. And when you relight that back up, he said that contributes to a poor experience because your saliva actually gets into the foot of your cigar and turns
doesn't
it
that
sour.
change with people? Like that doesn't
It
happen
could.
all. Yeah.
It could. Yeah, it depends on how much saliva is, on the end of the
Or like
cigar too.
People's mouths must be different with that
Yeah.
reaction.
But try not to slobber all over the end of your cigar because I think it can contribute more to a negative experience to your cigar more than anything else.
Yeah, and I've been guilty of that as well. So
Well, especially if you're smoking a cigar while you're doing something else. If you're in the yard or you're in the car or you're doing something, probably not the best time to smoke a cigar. But if you're holding it in your mouth, you can't help but that saliva build up, and it gets in the end of your cigar, and then it gets all gummed up too, and it can actually affect the draw. It can affect tar buildup in the end of the cigar as well.
Yeah, but I think me and you, Paul, in the last year especially, I think we've come to appreciate some of these shapes and what they can bring. Because I used to be, I'm a straight Parejo guy, and I still like a straight rounded cigar. Don't get me wrong, or straight box press. But I think we've come to appreciate these nuances that these other shapes can bring to the table, and they're not necessarily just aesthetic. There is some real value you can get out of the smoking experience.
Yeah, and I think I had to smoke a lot of cigars and review a lot of cigars to understand
Me
that
too.
the size matters a lot.
Yep.
And it's taken me years to really hone in on
too.
just how much that difference is. I think I always kind of realized that, I may like one size better than another. But now it's total, complete difference. It can be the same blend from the same manufacturer in the same line. And I like the Robusto, and Will likes the Toro. and then I
Right.
smoke the Toro and Will smokes the Robusto, and we get a totally different experience just because the size is different. And
Yep.
that has to do with so many factors. Primarily, it's just the ratio of tobacco that they're putting in each one of them. It can be the placement of the leaf in that cigar is different. A Toro, they've got a little more room to place the leaf in, towards the front or the back, the head and the foot, and not so much in the Robusto. So there's a lot of factors that go into it. And when you talk about these different shapes, Will, it certainly affects the smoking experience and in the flavors. And, everyone has their favorite sizes and their favorite lines. And I hope that after listening to this show, our listeners grow an appreciation for, I like this cigar in a Figurado, and I'm going to try it in a Figurado because, hey, maybe I tried it in a regular Parejo size and they didn't like it, to kind of speak to this segment, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I know at Stogie Center, we've been very partial to, obviously, Debonaire sponsor the torpedoes and the Bellicosas they've done there. I know we've talked about Saga's Perfecto. I mean, we've loved that,
That's
the
awesome.
blend number 7 in there. So there's, a lot of them that we've found some really, really good experiences with that.
And I tell you, smoking an Opus X in a box press has been an experience.
I was smoking the Triple X Opus X, that little Bellicoso, and this is just this got some age on it, Paul. It's like 7 or 8 years, you said.
Yeah. So what do you think of that, Will?
Fantastic. Hasn't lost. It hasn't lost any strength. I mean, it's still got some kick, but it's very well aged tobacco.
Brenda was telling me the same thing. I gave one to Brenda, and she said that was a fantastic cigar. She said that was really strong. And Brenda smokes some strong cigars. Like, she's not one to be a wuss about cigars in any stretch of the imagination.
No.
And she's like, that still had some punch to it. These are like 8-year-old Opus X, from the Fuente family in that little short Bellicoso size. And they're fantastic, Will.
Yeah, this is a great. I've had this size maybe once before, and I'm going back about 3 or 4 years, but it's a very good representation of the Opus X blend is just. We've talked a lot about it.
I have 13-year-old Opuses when my son Alex was born that are not
awesome.
smoked yet.
That's awesome.
Wow.
I guess.
Yeah, the Opus ages very well.
It does.
To speak to this box press size, Will, the amount of smoke that you get because of the box press, right? Because they'll typically underfill a box press and then press it together. Because if they fill it a normal amount of tobacco and then they press it, it's just going to be a tight draw. So they'll put less tobacco inside of it, and then they'll press it into that box press. You tend to get a better airflow through the box press. I've never had an Opus X in this particular Vitola, and just wonderful flavors, Will. Awesome. I find I get more sweetness out of this box press than some of the other sizes of Opus X, so it's really good.
Was that just coincidental that Les brought an Opus X into the studio for you?
No, he brought a mixture of cigars.
Right,
There was an Opus X, there was an Angel Share, and there was some General cigars. There was a Monte Cristo, there's some Ashton, some Alec Bradley, an EP Carrillo. And of course, I gravitated towards the Opus X because I know you said you had a relationship with the Fuentes, and I just grabbed this one. And I actually, when I started letting up, it was at the point where I realized it was a box press, and I had never seen the size before. So, Big Pete was actually saying the V cutter from Colibri. He finds that he's getting a better flavor experience. He's smoking an Angel Share Churchill, and that's a cigar he smoked before. He's like, I feel like I'm getting a lot more flavor from this cut,
And that's from the draw?
Yeah, the draw, like the surface area that you get and the way that it's drawing is changing the characteristics and flavor profile of the cigar in a positive way, that's really awesome. So that will round out this segment. This is our Debonaire Ideal segment for this evening. We're going to take a very short break, come back, and talk about our Stogies of the Week. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.